Hi everyone, I just wanted to put together a video really focused around something I've been thinking about over the last few days around painting your models, particularly in this hobby. I have joined part of a league, and as part of my league, we play games on a monthly basis, encouraging people to grow their armies. And for me, I chose to start a new army end of last year, and I've used that in this league. You get extra points for having a painted army, and I have some models which are painted to a standard which I would consider finished, and some models which are working towards that. And I thought it would be a good opportunity just to explore the hobby and kind of what people do in the hobby, where you might be in the hobby, and what people feel about painting their models and my own thoughts. So I collect several different armies, which means I spread myself thin across a few things, and I've got some armies which are very organic. I've got some armies which are very much not of that ilk, and I've got some armies which people would consider to be horde armies, so lots of models. So there's quite a variety in terms of what I paint in there, which I get enjoyment out of. But everyone and how they approach the hobby will be very different. I have been doing this for a good number of years now, and certainly my approach has changed over the year. I've developed myself as a painter and a hobbyist. How everyone engages with the hobby will also be very different. So these are kind of the pillars that people talk about with wargaming, and what people do. And I doubt there is a single person who equally enjoys every one of these as much as the next. For some people, they may never buy a model. They may simply enjoy the audiobooks and Black Library novels, and enjoy the hobby through its lore. But for a lot of people, I'd say a good number of people, collecting, building, and painting the models is quite a big part of what they do. For many people, and certainly I'd include myself for a number of years, they may never play any games. They may simply enjoy collecting the models, painting them, and hopefully try and not accumulate more than they paint in any given period of time, although that is the plight of being involved in this hobby. So I suppose the first thing I would say is, when you're thinking about what you do and how you approach it, is where are you in your hobby? Are you very much at one end of the spectrum like my kids are, which are they like putting some paints on a model, within a few minutes they're satisfied that the paint is covered in a wonderfully thick layer of paint, and they don't have any high expectations of themselves. They enjoy that. They simply, it's just the tactile nature of putting paint on a model. Conversely, someone at the other end of the spectrum in their journey might well be putting hours and hours each week or day into painting to extremely high standards, with a view to trying to win competitions. And lots of people will sit along that spectrum, and many of us will sit probably closer towards the left, I would imagine, than the right. It's a small minority who are able and get joy out of painting to such a high standard like that. And there's two things I suppose I ask myself when I am looking at my models, and why am I painting this model? And I suppose I don't ask it so much now because I feel quite established as myself in the hobby, but who am I painting it for? I suppose if you are someone who is a commission painter, then you probably have a specific standard that you work towards, and your clients as a result expect that level of quality and that standard from you. But ultimately, for the average Joe who enjoys the hobby for themselves, you're painting for yourself. And I think that's a really important thing. I think we sometimes try and measure ourselves against other people, and particularly with social media, we're exposed to lots of very good quality painters, which can be both inspiring but also a little bit intimidating. And I think people should probably bear in mind that actually for each of us, then what we need to be thinking about really is enjoying the hobby for what it is. And if we're measuring ourselves against anyone, it should be ourselves yesterday or last year, and trying to get better. So if you're painting for pleasure, what does that mean? Well, you see a model, you like the model, you enjoy it, and you invest your time and effort and emotion in doing that. And there's a lot that people will talk about in terms of that and what that means. For a lot of people, it's an opportunity to just disengage from everything around you and sit there, zone out a little bit, engage in a bit of mindfulness, and do this alongside other things, perhaps listening to books or podcasts. And there's a lot of joy to be had from just sitting and painting a model and seeing what you could achieve in 10 minutes or an hour or several hours. And that's quite a different kind of experience, perhaps, to someone who might be painting to a much higher standard or to a certain goal. And that, for example, might be painting for competition. And someone who does this has almost certainly probably been engaged in the hobby for a long time, or they are some freak of nature who can just do this without that. And these will people who are very emotionally invested in what the outcome is, and yeah, it's a slightly different approach to the hobby. I imagine they probably also get a great deal of joy out of it, but perhaps in a different way. It's very outcome based, and I think it's important to know if you are one or the other of those two people, because I think what you expect of yourself might be very different. But for a lot of us, we're just painting for gaming. People will need, if they want to play the game, so particularly things like Age of Sigmar or Warhammer 40,000, these are big games in that they involve lots of models very often, or a handful of very large models. And so I suppose when you are thinking about that, you need to try and get your models to a standard that you feel represents what you want them to do on the battlefield. Really important, I would suggest, is that when you think about kind of a standard for yourself, is please don't kind of put that model 2 inches in front of your face and critique it too heavily if actually what you want is it to look nice on the table, because those can be two very different things. So the kind of 3 feet or arm's length test is a good measure of that and worth thinking about. So painting standards, these might be imposed upon ourselves, or they might be related to events or things that we want to participate in. Unpainted models, I used to have a really big hang up on playing for my part with unpainted models, and something that I'm trying to break now, because the reality is actually, if you are trying to engage in the hobby, and especially, for example, it's your first army or the army that you're using as a new army, I would feel much more motivated to engage in the hobby if I was able to use unpainted models and then build upon that. And that might be a little bit intimidating if your opponent sets up their wonderfully painted and fully finished army opposite you, but actually I think there are lots of different communities available to people, and sitting there and working out where you sit within your community and having a conversation, I think in lots of cases it's very acceptable to do that. I would say though, just getting a primer on your models can make a really big difference how you feel about it. And one of the really good things about doing that is also those models can go back in a box when they perhaps underperform a little bit and they weren't quite the model you were expecting. You can go to box, and actually on the day that you do decide you want to get on with that unit and break them out again, they're all ready to go, rather than hoping that it's not too hot, not too cold, and the wind's not blowing in a certain direction when you come to rattle can those things. 3 colour minimum is well described and has been for many years in competitive play. Interestingly, there have been discussions with Frontline Gaming in terms of their events as to whether they are now moving away from 3 colour minimum, because they felt that what they envisage for that is perhaps people are manipulating, or kind of they are doing literally putting a primer on a model and then adding 2 dots of paint in different colours, and that's 3 colour minimum. It wasn't what they envisaged, but perhaps what they wanted is a little bit more akin to what the Games Workshop team describe as battle ready, which is your base coats, perhaps a wash, some basic basing, and ultimately it's your hobby. So which of those you decide to do, or even higher, is up to you. Some people will have their armies painted to an extremely high standard, not least to try and win awards in that domain. So when you think about it, I suppose ultimately it comes down to what is good enough for you. And for me, for example, model on the left here, which some people will recognise as a Maleceptor, I've painted that to a standard where I'm pretty happy that's all finished and done. Conversely, the model on the right, for me, it isn't finished yet, but actually it's now painted to a standard where most of the colours are down, the panels are all blocked in. I've put a varnish on that because I'm satisfied that that's at a standard now where it's quite acceptable. I can get on with some other units to get them finished, to get everything else up to this standard, and ultimately then I can get them on the table, hopefully get enthusiastic about painting them up and finishing them to my own standard in the future. So your mileage will vary. Please don't compare yourself to everyone else, and just think about what is good enough for you. And I'd be really interested to hear people's thoughts on what do you think is the standard people should aim for? Is it all personal preference? What are your thoughts on if you put down your army against someone and their army is entirely unpainted? Does that make a difference to your hobby? It might, but how should we respond to that as people trying to encourage people to engage in this hobby? Be really grateful for your thoughts, and I will catch up with you again soon. So take care.